Good evening, and welcome to this Center for Brooklyn History talk. Tonight, we're very excited because tomorrow is the release of Rebecca Carroll's powerful new memoir, Surviving the White Gaze. And on this night of anticipation, the Center for Brooklyn History has the great honor of hosting her in conversation. Before introducing Rebecca and her conversation partner, Elie Mystal, let me briefly introduce myself and say a word about the Center for Brooklyn History. My name is Marcia Elie. I am Director of Programs at the Center, which was formerly the Brooklyn Historical Society and is now a part of the Brooklyn Public Library. In addition to stewarding the most extensive collection of Brooklyn history in the world, and in addition to our research and education activities, every week, the Center for Brooklyn History offers free public programs like this one through BPL's programming arm, BPL Presents. For instance, in the next few weeks, CBH and BPL Presents will be hosting programs with Naomi Klein, Masha Gessen, Toshi Reagan, Roxane Gay, and many, many others. I hope you'll all go to the Brooklyn Public Library's website and find the BPL Presents page and explore what's coming up. I also want to share two important notes. First, we will put in the chat a link to purchase Surviving the White Gaze locally at the community bookstore in Brooklyn. And I encourage you all to buy a copy of this book. And second, I want to invite everyone to share any questions you might have for Rebecca throughout the program. Simply type them into the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. Now it is my great pleasure to welcome Rebecca and Ellie and tell you a brief bit about each of them. Rebecca Carroll has been the host of the podcast Come Through with Rebecca Carroll, a cultural critic at the public media station WNYC, and a critic at large for the Los Angeles Times. Her personal essays, cultural commentary, profiles, and opinion pieces have appeared in The Atlantic, The New York Times, The Guardian, Essence, New York Magazine, Ebony, and Esquire, among other publications. She is the author of several interview-based books about race and Blackness in America, including the award-winning Sugar in the Raw. And tomorrow, her new memoir, Surviving the White Gaze, enters the world. Elie Mystal is the nation's justice correspondent covering the courts, the criminal justice system and politics, and the force behind the magazine's monthly column, Objection. He is also an Alfred Nobler Fellow at the Type Media Center. Mystal is a graduate of Harvard College and Harvard Law School, a former associate at Debevoise and Plimpton, and a lifelong Mets fan. And one of those things is not like the others. Prior to joining the Nation, Mystal was the executive editor of Above the Law. He's a frequent guest on MSNBC and Sirius XM. So I thank you both so much for being here, and I turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Marcia. Thank you all for coming. My name is Ellie. I finished the last chapter of this book last night. It is amazing. I suggest you all buy it. But since it is not out yet, I think we should give you a bit of a flavor of what this book is about. Now, I have a confession to make. I feel like this is one of those books where what resonates with you says more about you than it does the author. What's going to strike you, I think, is going to be very tailored to your own experiences. So I was delighted 5 minutes ago when I realized that the thing that I was hoping Rebecca would read was also the thing that she wanted to read, because that was not a fait accompli. So with that, Rebecca, would you please read one of your chapters from your excellent memoir?
Thank you. I would be delighted. This is chapter 21. Tess had two pictures of my birth father, whose name I learned was Joe Banks. She gave them to me when I finally worked up the nerve to ask her, not long after I started going to the speakeasy, spending time with Black boys who had Black fathers. The week I'd spent in DC had emboldened me to lay claim to a biological parent, a lineage, and a history that would allow me to keep the joy I felt with Jasmine and Kevin and the other Black kids as my own. But I needed to see it in my birth father's face and skin and posture to take his image and existence out from the filter of Tess's subterfuge. The photos would allow me to piece together my own distillation of who my father was and who he might be now. Tess laid them out on the kitchen table, and I touched the worn edges as if they were velvet and not the creased, yellowing paper of pictures taken from another time. They appeared both vintage and modern, simultaneously relics and urgent pieces of evidence. They're yours to keep, Tess said. I couldn't take my eyes off them. One photo in black and white featured Tess and Joe in a wooded area at a bit of a distance. Joe is in profile, leaning up against a tree, tall and narrow looking with chiseled cheekbones, extending a thin branch of some sort to Tess, whose hand is reaching out to receive it. He's wearing a light-colored safari-style jacket and fitted pants, hemmed at the ankle, wearing loafers, dark sunglasses, and a short, tight afro. Tess, in jeans and white sneakers, has on a hooded windbreaker. Her shoulder-length hair is pulled back in a low ponytail, and her mouth is ajar, as if she's saying something to Joe. I think I may have been pregnant with you in this one, she said. Really? That looks like the fall, and I got pregnant with you in August. I mean, I wouldn't have known I was pregnant because I was in total denial, Tess said. It was something she'd said before, but I'd already gone back into the pictures, immersed in the images of my Black father, suddenly feeling deeply attached to him. The second photo, this one in color, but also of the two of them, is more close up, with Tess and Joe sitting on the grass among friends at a political rally of some sort, Tess told me. Joe, again in profile, is wearing the same cargo jacket from the other picture, the same dark sunglasses, leaning back on his arms, looking forward, nose sloping down toward his lips. Tess is looking straight at the camera, her hair down and tucked behind her ears, wearing regular glasses and a denim jacket. Joe loved to be seen, Tess said, and he was cool as a cuke. He looks it, I said. I wish you had a picture of him without the sunglasses. Oh, he wore those sunglasses all the time. It was part of his appeal. He was very stylish and very into his looks. I had never heard Tess say more than 4 words about my birth father. Basically, he was a dog. And so this felt exciting, if also slightly unsettling. Why now? I didn't dare ask. I just wanted to sit with the photos and write a story in my head about me and my Black father. I wondered what he would say to me about these Black boys I found so appealing all of a sudden. Would he call them jive, young Negro boys, as Tess had called them more than once? Would he caution me to stay away from them or tell me exactly how to handle them and myself as his daughter? Do you know if I was his only daughter? I asked. I don't, but you know Black men are often out here having kids with a lot of different women, so who knows? As soon as she said that, I lost the thread, and the story I was writing shifted. Even though I was sitting there, staring at pictures of my birth father, Tess's comment suddenly lessened him to a faceless, stereotypical Black man in America, and suddenly Dad, the only father I'd ever known, fell into the void created by Tess's racism. I gathered the pictures up and put them in my bag to bring home to Warner, thinking that when I got home, I would ask Dad his feelings about Black people, whether he'd had any Black friends growing up, and maybe I'd show him the picture of Joe Banks if he seemed interested. The Blacks mostly kept to themselves, Dad said plainly, when I asked him if he'd ever had any Black friends. But I was mostly interested in girls, and turtles, of course. But there were Black students at your school in Groton, right? Dad had gone to a public high school in Groton, Connecticut, which, he told me, was integrated with Black students. Yes, a handful, he said, but like I said, they really just preferred to keep to themselves. Did you ever think that might be about self-preservation in a predominantly white environment? I never really thought about it, Beck, Dad said. Did you think about trying to make friends with any of them? They weren't interested in being friends with white people. And since then, though, I said, struggling to map this out in my brain, no Black friends. You and Mom have never had Black friends. Well, look around, Beck, Dad laughed, thinking the whiteness of our town and immediate surroundings was funny. That's kind of my point, Dad. Look around. Of course, there was my friend Li Ling when I was at the museum school, Dad offered, and he was just a great friend and all. Also Chinese. Yes, Li Ling was this little Chinese guy, funny as hell, Dad said. I don't know, Beck. I've mostly chosen to live in places where there aren't that many humans in general. I really need to be around the natural world. But didn't you think it might be important if you were raising a Black child for her to see other Black people? Mom and I both really thought the world was changing and that people were coming toward each other, Dad said. We really believed what Martin Luther King was saying. And, we had those wonderful years on the Hill together and all. And this beautiful house we have now, I mean, how lucky are we? I didn't show the 2 pictures I had of my birth father to my dad. Instead, I kept them and him and us to ourselves, like the Black kids he described in high school.
Happy Black History Month.
Yeah.
I want to start there. Look, the one of the constant themes in this book is that you've got kind of 2 different kinds of white people, right? You've got white friends and family members and colleagues who try to erase your Blackness.
Right.
That erasure is what they think is being nice to you, right?
Right.
And then you have this other set of white people who are much more population-wise, kind of much more in the main, the kind of Charlie Rose type of white people, the societal white people who see you as Black and will never see you as anything other than Black, right?
Right. That's such an interesting distinction. So wait, societal Black people, and then the former category is, what do we call them?
Your buddies.
Well,
right? Like
but it's interesting though that they weren't my buddies. And one of like a crowning moment, and I wrote an essay about it, but an op-ed about it, but it's not in the book, was, when my son was probably 3 or 4 years old, and we were in New Hampshire, and I got very anxious, and I was waiting for my son to come back from fishing with my brother, and we were in an environment where there were all these white people. I mean, it was all white people, but I was just saying to my mom, I just need my people. Like, my son is my people. And she was like, we're not your people?
Yeah. Like he's with his uncle.
Right. So, I mean, that is a particular kind of white person. And it is a particular kind of white adoptive parent who will say, all that matters is our love for you and the fact that we brought you into this family and we treat you like another member of the family.
So what is your advice for that kind of white person? What is your advice for like the colleague or the coworker or the friend who thinks in some warped way they are doing you a solid by erasing your Blackness, right? That they are treating you as an equal by pretending essentially that you're not actually Black, or you're not like one of those Blacks, or you're one of the good, or however they compartmentalize it in their head. What's the strategy for them to kind of break out of that? So
insofar as a strategy or advice, I don't have a strategy or advice. I do have a statement, which is that is delusional bullshit. And it's also deeply offensive, right? Like the erasure part of it, while perhaps coming from a well-intentioned, which I would just love to swipe that whole phrase off of the entire planet. Like I will find you valuable if I erase something that is integral to who you are. Like who thinks that? But that's not what these particular white people are thinking. And that is what the white gaze is. That is specifically what the white gaze is, which is unable to see Blackness or anything that isn't white outside of the context of whiteness. So I think that you could call it advice, but I would say it's delusional to even aspire towards something that is about erasing race or colorblind for that matter, and start to think about ways in which you can internalize the things that you have been internalizing for however long you've been on the planet, living in this particular society of white supremacy. Like, it is so bone deep. You have to purge a little bit so you can make some space, right? So you can make some space for thinking in a different way.
What I like about that answer is that it doesn't put the onus and the stress on the Black person in this situation. It doesn't put the onus and the stress on the Black friend in this situation. You know, as I like to say to my white friends, I was not put on this earth to educate you. Like, like other things that I need to do in my life.
I also really resist the idea of educating, period, because we've done so badly with education in this country, on many levels, but certainly on the level of American history. Here we are, the first day of Black History Month, because we get a month. That's what we get. But I'm saying it shouldn't be about education or diversity and inclusion initiatives. It should actually be about interrogating the way in which we've been taught to think and feel about other people, about Black folks particularly.
Let's talk about Black men. And I say this like, look, what's going to hit people is going to be adjusted to their own taste. I noticed some of the Black men stuff in this book, perhaps at a higher level. As you, from the chapter that you read that I thought was so beautifully written, you talk about, in other places as well, how your biological white mother poisoned your relationship with pretty much any Black man in your life. I find that to be very, I feel like you can scale that up to American society in general. American society kind of poisons our relationship with Black people and with Black men in particular. In particular, there's a passage where you talk about there's a dance troupe that comes into your all-white high school, Black dance troupe. One of the guys is looking at you, and you reject him, self-consciously, knowing that rejecting of this Black man is what you need to do in your white high school to remain accepted by the white popular kids in your high school. You get it even as a young person that you can't be popular and like that Black guy. You can have one, not both, right? So you've got this kind of, again, self-directed rejection of Black men in that moment in order to be accepted by your white society. I would argue that, again, you can scale that up, and it's a lesson that I think, a lot of immigrant communities learn early in this country, that, if you want to show your solidarity with whiteness, crapping on Blackness is the way to go. That's how you prove you're part of the team, crapping on Black people. Right. But your mom, it's a Black son, and you know that he has to go out there and deal with this. So, like, how do you strengthen him as a Black son, knowing what's waiting for him, knowing the rejections that are waiting for him? How do you strengthen him within the confines of your own home to be strong enough to go out there and take what you know is waiting for him just off once he gets onto the sidewalk?
So I have thought about that question and answered that question and remeditated on that question a million times, really, because, things really shifted for he and I as a mother and son, specifically after Michael Brown was shot and Ferguson was murdered. And my son was 9 at the time, and he asked, and I write about this in the book, he asked if he and I were going to get shot. And it was, I remember it so vividly. Something shifted. It was like a tectonic shift in my being, in my psyche. And I realized that nobody, the casual racism with which the white people, societal, and the buddies lived as if it was just fine, right? Or as if it were too bad, or, none of it had been taken to heart. And in that moment with my child, I took it so to heart. And that really shifted things for us as a mother and son. Also me as a Black woman in America, a Black mother, a writer. And so I try to think about ways in which I can have the talk or the conversation with him in a way that is not suffocating, that is not prohibitive, that is not that does not make him feel targeted. And I feel, and I draw on what I feel I experienced, you know, in terms of my survival of the white gaze, which is that there were several times throughout my life where I felt the ancestors sort of popped in and plopped people in, right? Right. And
people,
so,
as you said, people showed up when you needed them to.
yes, exactly. And so I feel like I wrote this book. It's dedicated to my son. It's for my son, but also that the ancestors are looking out for him. And I trust them. And it's not, you know, I was raised, you know, as an existentialist. I'm still figuring out my relationship with religion, but that's the closest thing for me in terms of faith, is that I know my ancestors are looking out for me and that they will look out for my child. Obviously, you know, you as a parent, Ellie, I'm sure have had these conversations with yourself, with your partner, with your kid. Like, you know, I mean, we have to think of in both realistic and creative terms, and be careful about the language that we choose.
One of the things that hurts, my kids are younger than yours. My kids are younger than yours was at the time that Brown was shot. My kids were 7, almost 8, my oldest one, during George Floyd this past summer. So it's still, we've been, because I'm saying that basically by way of saying, I've been able to shelter them. Basically, I've been able to keep, not just shelter them, really control the information flow. Right. Into them, right? And that's a better word than sheltering, because you're not trying to completely shelter. Right. You want them to understand what's happening, but really only through the very small kind of straw of drip of information that I'm giving them, as opposed to the whole spigot. But I have you were talking about answers. I can also rely on my partner who is, you know, from Zimbabwe. I can rely on my mother who lives with us, who's a Black woman who was born in Mississippi. I've got aunts and uncles. Like I've got a whole, I'm not trying to do this alone, is what I'm saying. Mm-hmm. You talk about how in college you didn't have community. Mm-hmm. Do you have it now? And what does that look like?
So, you know, it looks like a couple of things, right? It looks like my chosen family, my dear friend Corinne and her son Anwar, we spend Thanksgiving with them and we travel with them. It's my squad of girlfriends. It's my husband and my son. You know, my husband is white, but he is also, yes, and I just did a butt thing about him. Sorry, I didn't mean to do that. He is deeply engaged. He's deeply engaged with the world. He's deeply engaged in a way that is not woke. It is part of, he considers we are a Black family. So yes, and it was obviously circuitous. But you know, Corinne, who I mentioned, kind of saved my life, actually. And that was one of those moments when the ancestors were like, you're going to need to listen to her right now. You know, when I was in one of the darkest periods of my life, where I was just like, what the hell is this? And so, yeah, I do feel like I have community.
I wanted to come back to your husband, because one of the things I thought was interesting about him near the end, you point out that he's studied it. Right? Mm-hmm. He doesn't just, you know, he doesn't just understand Blackness from like watching a couple of shows on BET. Like he's made this like his work. For you in the book, you talk about how, you know, how Black literature, when you found it, which wasn't there for you when you're growing up, but when you found it, how, you know, being opened up to people like Baldwin and Hurston and, you know, these writers really allowed you to understand your Blackness in a different way. I have a very kind of personal experience with that. My wife, like I mentioned, is from Zimbabwe. You know, Zimbabwe has its own racial hangups and issues, but when she came here to college, you know, dealing with American style racism was just a mind job. It was a whole different thing. Right. I wasn't all that helpful because A, I was mainly trying to get in her pants, but also B, like I had other things, you know, I had my own issues to work through. Sure. She took Skip Gates's literature class at Harvard, which was what got her into all of this literature and really kind of allowed her to understand what white, I mean, it's like reading people like Ralph Ellison allowed her to understand what white people were trying to do to her. And that kind of opened up her experience. So I wanted to first ask you about just can you explain more just how important kind of just reading Black authors can be?
So that's the thing, right? Is that especially now in this quote unquote racial reckoning moment, there are, and all due respect to our brothers and sisters out there who, Ibram Kendi and all the rest who are writing books about anti-racism and how to be an anti-racist and, these kinds of books, which I think are important and have their place too. But when people ask me, I'm like, read Toni Morrison, read James Baldwin. It's all there. And don't just read it because it will give you an insight into Black culture. Read it because it's fucking great writing. Are you kidding? Like, you know what I mean? So it's like a twofer, But so often people, especially white people, are like, well, I guess I should probably learn to read or read, such and such. And again, I go back to this notion of, don't think of it as training or practicing or, getting the right education, because we've done so bad with education. And I do want to say, because you mentioned, and this may be semantics, but that's what I do, that, that my husband is educated. He's not educated. It is what he lives, right? Like he reads a broad swath of authors. Many, 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 many of them are Black, but not because he's educating himself, because it is interesting and good and makes his brain bigger and makes all of it, you know what I mean? It's like, I resist the idea of assigning people, like chapters or, books to read. I had I've had several, as you may or may not have, but I've had some white casualty friendships in the last 10 years or so. But I had one white friend email me and say, I'm reading this book about, what white supremacy is and what white fragility is. And I just wanted you to know, I know I could have been more aware earlier on. Why are you telling me that? That's not why you read it. I don't need to know that. If it was doing what it was supposed to do, you wouldn't have to tell me that.
Oh, yeah.
Right? But isn't that right?
Yeah, although I guess I'm a little bit more forgiving of all people. Insofar as like, maybe it's ego. First of all, I like white people emailing me and telling me that it turns out I was right. Like, I just does make me happy. I'm not gonna lie, but but I feel like they gotta start somewhere, right? And that's why I wonder, like, your point. If it was doing what it was supposed to do, you wouldn't need to, maybe what you're talking about is kind of like the master's course. And I'm just still trying to figure out how to get people into like remedial, just understanding of the world they're actually living in. Because to go back to your adoptive dad, it's like when white people say like, whoa, there are no Black people around. No, there are Black people everywhere.
Right.
If you look, this is a multicultural, diverse society that we're in. There are Black stories and Black experiences and immigrant experiences everywhere. If you just bother to look, it's the people who can't see them are the ones who aren't even looking. Yeah. And so I guess when they finally start to look, I try to like, hey, here's a cat,
Well done. Right?
Yeah. So, okay, I can't, I know we need to take questions from the audience, and I absolutely will do that, but I can't let you out of here this book without talking a little bit about the way the media plays into all of this. So one of the first, I think I read this excerpt before before I got the book, about your experiences at Elle. Obviously your experiences with the Charlie Rose program. Like, so often you have been the one Black person in an entire publication or an entire organization, or one of a handful of Black people in an entire organization. So I've got two questions. One is kind of, how does the media do better? Like, just how do we force, the media, decision makers who are almost always white, to value representation because it makes their programs better, because it makes their publications better? Like, how do we get them to make that one-to-one connection? And then two, a little bit more pointedly, do you think that Black people, let's say like us, Black people who are, let's say, experts at navigating white spaces, are some level kind of overrepresented amongst the underrepresented, section of Black people allowed to be in media in the first place? You see what I'm saying?
I do see what you're saying. That's a very, very good question. I think, the first question about doing better is not that complicated, really. It's actually going past the representation point. It's going past the hire. It's going past the initiative, and it's about standing down. For white folks in positions of power, there's no incentive. There's really literally no incentive, except when there's pressure put upon them, right? And so, I think that white gatekeepers or media makers and white journalist spaces, media spaces, it has to be a very committed process of standing down, of deferring, but also not being like, well, I don't know anything about that, right? Like I'll let you handle that. But actually then going and seeing where the resources are, if not in their personal lives, which 9 out of 10 times there aren't, but in other ways, and then bring that into the next conversation, right? Bring that into the next conversation, because we really are trying to figure out new language around this. I think we're trying to reset in a way that we can maximize this very, very, small crack in the window of equity, equality, having real conversations where we're heard. And that brings me to the second part of the question.
Can I just cable that for a second? Because I just want to put a pin in that, because I think it's so important that people understand that I don't know anything about that is not an acceptable answer. It just isn't. And you know it because it's never an acceptable answer for me, right? It's never an acceptable answer for me to walk into WNYC and be like, I don't know nothing about no Dolly Parton. Like, nobody accept that. Like, nobody would accept that. People would like buy me a CD, right, and force me to freaking listen to Jolene, and they would make me learn something about Dolly goddamn Parton, right? So if that's the world that I am always in, then it's simply not acceptable for you.
That's right.
As a person, like, well, I just don't know anything about that. Well, learn. So sorry.
Yeah.
Cut you
right.
off.
No, that's a perfect parallel example. Absolutely perfect. But in terms of being overrepresented, being put out in front, do you mean in explaining these kinds of things?
Yeah, like people who do know something about Dolly Parton, right? Like Black people who have excelled at navigating white spaces do better in white spaces, and that tends to I worry a lot of whether or not that crowds out. And I don't want to say more authentic voices, because I don't think that's a fair way of looking at it. But it crowds out Black voices who are not very good at navigating white spaces, and in part maybe have even something different to say because they're not very good at navigating.
That is a whole other conversation, right? Because what you've stumbled onto, not stumbled onto, but what you have brought up here is this notion of authentic voices, is this notion of navigating white spaces as which is just might as well be another way of serving the system that's already in place, right? But I also think we have to interrogate what we mean by authentic voices, what we mean by different perspectives, what we want to hear. And I wish I felt like we were closer to getting to that. But as you said, like, we're still trying to get a remedial understanding of where we're at in this country. But I love that idea and of kind of assessing and looking at voices that are different. I mean, that's pretty much what I've done my whole career. but I think we need to spend more time with that, and I don't have a quick answer to it.
All right, well, let's go to the questions from the audience. Thank you guys so much for asking questions. We appreciate that. I'm going to summarize this first one in, have you seen examples of non-toxic transracial adoption? I'll summarize that to, does it ever work? Does it ever work? And how?
Oh, that's a tough question, because, you know, this is why I don't,
right? Like,
pardon?
Part of it is like, well, what does working mean? Like, what,
right,
you know,
what does working mean? And also, this is why I don't sort of identify with the transracial community. Not that I don't have tons of respect, but I don't know if it works, and I don't feel like I can tell people to not make families the way they want to make families. I can tell you what my experience is. I can tell you as the ways in which my experience sort of intersects with the way that the country works and the way that systemic racism works and the colonistic mentality of this country and the white savior mentality of this country. But, you know, I think
so Rebecca, are you saying that Amy Coney Barrett doesn't get a pass on racism just because she adopted Black children? Because I believe that Josh Hawley and Ted Cruz think that ends that discussion.
Right? I mean, so to me, that is so painstakingly clear what her intentions were and are. And I think of her child and her children, and I think of the white children that she has, who, like my siblings, my parents' biological children, have no idea what my experience has been, or it just doesn't occur to them, or it doesn't appeal to them, or whatever the case may be. My advice, was there an advice question there, or was it, does it ever work?
Just, yeah, does it, you know, have you seen examples where it does work? The question was more positive than my spin.
Yeah, and I think you hit the nail on the head, which is like, what does working mean for you? Did I feel loved? Absolutely. Did I feel like I was missing something? Obviously, yes. Did I grieve that? Did it drive me into difficult, dangerous situations? Yes. Do I think that Black kids should be around as many Black folks and Black culture as possible? Absolutely. Do I think white people and white parents have the tools or the history of handling that? No, I don't.
Do you think, how do I put this right? Because gender is a thing that's stalking your narrative as well.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes, it is.
And the particular ways that sexuality and femininity is whitened. You know, black men have, there are very few ways that Black men are allowed to be, but one can imagine a way that a Black man is kind of allowed to be sexy or powerful or whatever. It's very hard to imagine. It's much more difficult to imagine ways that Black women are allowed to be those things that aren't just looking like white women.
Right.
So like the way I want, again, without trying to, I don't want to, you should buy the book. I don't want to like spoiler alert or anything like that. But like the part where like your white parents didn't have lotion,
yeah,
like made me like put down the book and like go scream at my wife about like the injustice of it all, right? Like like just so like still with this kind of question of can interracial or whatever adoptions work, like is there not at least some like basic training that white parents need about the physical needs?
I love that you go back to sort of the remedial and the basic and the like one step at a time kind of thing. And I'm much more like, you know, that the internalization of that kind of thing is what is not talked about, you know, and the ways in which, you know, like I think a lot about that thing that my, you know, the experience I had in 5th grade when my teacher told me I was very pretty for a Black girl. That was the out-facing racism. That was the story, the anecdote that I told throughout sort of my life and in writing. What really fucked me up, what I really internalized, was what she said after that, which was that most Black girls are ugly. most Black girls are unattractive. That's what I kept in here and continued on into my 20s, into my late 20s. Like, most Black girls are ugly. My legacy, my history, the Black girlness that I come from is most often ugly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think for me, the one of those that I internalized was how all my teachers would always say that I spoke so well.
Right.
First of all, I fucking do. But like, but like how it was just like, yeah, speaks so well and and with the, you know, sometimes subtle, sometimes explicit implication that other Black people didn't speak as well. And
Right,
for a
right.
long time, like into college
Right.
time, I really thought that being able to put two sentences together made me special.
Yeah.
Made me, you know,
Yeah.
and it really took rap music to be like, but I can't do that. So like, how can you tell me that I'm special? Because I've got the flow of like a cabbage. Like I've got nothing on what an actual, you know, hip hop artist can do. So how can speaking alone be? But the point that I think is worth extracting here is that there are hurts and there are slings and arrows that impact internally, right?
Mm-hmm.
And long after you stop the bleeding, long after you staunch the wound, there's an internal impact that can take a very, very long time to unpack when you are constantly subjected to these racialized and straight up racist thoughts.
Right.
Another question, what are Rebecca's only thoughts on the prospects of a functional multicultural democracy? To what extent is there hope based on your experience? Thus kind of, I guess the question is, you know, do we ever all just get along? Do we ever,
you know,
ever get to a point of a true multicultural polity?
I don't really traffic in hope. I also think that we are a true multicultural society. That's not the problem. The problem is that we are unable to, we haven't found the language. We haven't found another way to be a multicultural society. And so that's the challenge. That's the where the conversations and the engagement and the evolution needs to happen.
What do you think the urge, so what would you urge white parents of Black children to do to support their kids? Here's a really interesting way of putting it. What were some of the elements of Blackness that you longed for and were missing in white spaces?
You know, it can be as simple as, you know, and I write about this in the book, you know, my son, when we were leaving a visit with my parents several years ago, he was like, it's weird that there aren't any like there's no Black art up on the walls. It's weird, right, Mom? Does that hurt your feelings? I'm like, yeah, kind of. So I think it's not just one Serena Williams poster. I think it's not just one Donna Summer album. I think it's, you know, I think it is an immersion. I think it is about having a Black family, because that is what you are when you have Black children. That doesn't mean that you are Black. Right. And there is a very, you know, because white folks are so unaccustomed to thinking about Blackness and Black folks in a way that doesn't demoralize or degrade. It's sort of like, okay, what's the flip of that? Okay, let me just bring it and take it and own it and appropriate it, and then we're good to go. It's like, you know, it's like our family. We are a Black family with a white guy in it, you know, and he's aware of that, and that's just fine. But I guess I would say to white parents of Black children, you know, your children are your children, but they are also children of Black culture, and you have to, so there has to be a Black cultural parent or proxy in the house.
For me, the thing that I long for most when I notice most when it's not there, I guess is the way of putting it, is just the easy acknowledgement of pain. There are so many times in life where something racist will happen. I mean, it happens consistently, it happens daily, it happens pretty much as soon as you step out of your door. You're gonna get some level of white supremacy will befall you. And when you are in an accepting environment, when you're in an environment, for me, particularly around Black people, there's just like, you don't have to explain it, right? You don't have to go through all the road of like, blah, 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 blah. You can just share a look, you know, like, oh, we both saw that. Okay, moving on with our day. I go back to the quote, you know, the very serious work of racism is to distract Black people, right? Like I've got, like, as I said earlier, like I am busy. I have things that I want to accomplish in my life, and stopping to like explain,
yeah, right.
You know, Bob,
yeah,
that was just racist. What happened? Like that's just like, it's enervating, right?
yeah.
When I'm in a community, I don't have to waste that time. I can just, you know, yep, okay. Anyway, next, and move on. And I feel like I lose that when I'm in predominantly white spaces.
And I feel like, sorry, go ahead, but go ahead.
No.
I was just going to say, like, you mentioned the chapter of this boy, and it was actually middle school that the breakdancing group came to, because the next time I saw a breakdancing group, I was ready. But we had that exchange, that very same exchange of like, damn, what is going on here? It wasn't just attraction. It was like, oh, and that's hard to put into words, really.
Yeah, I mean, well, you do it very well in your book, but yes, it takes a lot of words to put it into words.
Right.
I think a lot of times. All right, another question. What was one of the hardest choices you had to make in writing the book, and how did you decide what to do? And this is without spoilers, because I think I know.
Oh, I would say, as any memoirist will tell you, what the goal is to be as compassionate as possible. I had a figure in my life who was really difficult to be compassionate towards. That's my birth mother. But I hope that I was able to I don't know. That is one. It's such a central theme and it's such a through line. I had to include it, but there were parts of it that I felt I struggled with including. And also, you know, I mean, it's all about, if you're a memoirist and you write about your parents while they're all still alive, it's like, this is going to be tough for you to read. But it's also in this context, a gift, you know, to my white adoptive parents, and my white siblings. Like, I want you to know what my experience was, because you are my family. But there were, I guess the short answer is there were particular experiences, conversations that happened that I struggled with. And ultimately I had to own the story. I had to own it. And so that's what I did.
So my follow-up question to that, I was gonna say this to the end, but it works here. Why did you want to kind of open up, re-look at, re-examine some very painful experiences? You know, and I come at this through my own lens. You know, I have I got some daddy issues, I'm sure, that we can find. My father is dead, and I was kind of, that's great, because like it's over now. At some level, you this could have been over for you, but it kind of, you know what I'm saying? Like you didn't have to write this book. You have a successful career. You're a successful author of many different types of, like, you didn't have to go back into your own self and look at this stuff again. So why? I'm
a writer, for one. Two, I'm done with it. I don't want those experiences anymore. You know, since I wrote it, I find myself sort of kind of roaming around in these now empty spaces in my brain and in myself. Like, I excavated these experiences because I'm done with them. they were causing more harm in my body than they are out in the world. And I also really hope that it is in service of adoptees, adoptive parents, of girls, of women, of men. I mean, there are a lot of threads, as you know from having read the book. And what is your experience if you are a writer, if you can't then use that to give people ways to grow their brains, ways to grow their hearts, but ultimately I had arrived at a place where I had the emotional fortitude and foundation to excavate these things that had been causing me pain while still existing in my body.
That's an amazing answer. That's an amazing answer. Okay. I can add that for that. That's just perfect. Okay. One of the delights of reading, of hearing you read your own work is how much the language you use to tell your story comes alive to create meaning. Throughout your journey, how have you relied on language, and when has it been most useful, and when is language not enough?
Whew. I mean, talking about my North Star, Toni Morrison, I mean, we do language, right? That's what we do, and I think it's one of the things that really saved me, and that sort of cradled me and lifted me. And as you know from reading the book, I mean, I was a devoted journal writer. I mean, I used to literally just write, and and I started at a very young age, when it wasn't that interesting, when it was like, well, I had dance class today, good night. In my little diary, right? But I still did. I still wrote every day and every night before bed. And language feels like the most satisfying, apart from the love of my family and friends, thing in my life.
Can I ask you, since I buttered you up, can I ask you a little bit of a pointed question? Did you gloss over at all your acceptance into various Black communities as you grew and developed? Because there's the one bit where you're with your Black Girl War Council at Hampshire, and they tell you, like, well, the truth is that we called you the Black girl who thought she was white.
Mm-hmm.
But you're not. But then it's kind of like you say that, and then it's kind of like ... and now they're doing your hair, and so like it's all like, was it as easy as you? I think in your book you make it sound relatively easy, that like there were always Black people, whether it's Jasmine, whether it's Karen, who were willing to accept you as you grew into your own Blackness. And there aren't a lot of stories of Black people who rejected you because as you were trying to grow into your own Blackness. Was it always that easy?
No, absolutely not.
It wasn't for me.
No, it absolutely was not. And Ellie, the other thing, I mean, and I felt like while writing this, like this could be a whole nother book, which is that there, up until, my mid-20s, I still thought it's actually more valuable to be valued by white people.
Mm.
So I was not doing myself any favors, and so when that particular scene I include because it was so poignant for me, and it was the first time a Black person had said to me what I had been thinking. And I included in the journal entry, I did not think I was white, but at the same time, I did think that being valued by whiteness was better.
And when did that, to get you out of here, what because the other thing that strikes me that I like, because I feel like it's honest, there's no like there's no like you woke up one day, it's like, I'm going to be Black today. There's not one day where you wake, I'm going to reject whiteness today. Like that's not how it works, right? You come to it. Am I missing that? Like, was there kind of one moment or that I missed, or like, am I right in my read on this, that you emerged into a rejection of whiteness as opposed to having it like all happen on a great Tuesday?
That's right. That's absolutely right. And so the book is called Surviving the White Gaze, but it's also about becoming a Black woman. It's a coming of age story, right? It's not, it's very much like you ask, why, when or what was the right time to write it. I am wholly who I am. I did. And that's extraordinary. That's remarkable to feel that in one's lifetime and to be able to share that. So yes, it was definitely an evolution. Though it would have been fun if it was just a good Tuesday.
We can all hope to have such a good Tuesday, right? That is the end of our hour. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you, Center for Brooklyn History, for hosting us and having us. I hope you all buy Surviving the White Gaze by Rebecca Carroll. It's a fantastic read. It's in addition to the fact that it's interesting, it's just extremely well written. Take it from a writer. There's real craft here. So buy it for the craft, if not just for the amazing life story. Rebecca, thank you so much for writing this book and for sharing it with all of us.
Thank you, Ellie. Thank you for your amazing questions and conversation. I always love to be in conversation with you. And thank you, everybody, for coming. I appreciate it.
All right, have a nice one, guys.